A millionaire throws his wife out of the house upon discovering she couldn't have children. 7 years later, he is left stunned when he sees her with twins who are his exact likeness. The Bennett mansion stood like a sentinel on Beacon Hill, its red brick facade and white columns a testament to old Boston money and influence. For inside, the tick of an antique grandfather clock echoed through the cavernous foyer, marking time in a house where warmth seemed as scarce as dust on the immaculate surfaces. Dolores Bennett, a woman of 60 with steel-grey hair pulled into a tight chignon, sat ramrod straight in her leather armchair. Her ice-blue eyes focused on the crackling fire, but her mind was elsewhere, plotting and planning as it always did. She was the puppet master of the Bennett family, and her fingers were never still. "Ryan," she called, her voice as crisp as freshly pressed linen. "Come here, darling." From the study across the hall emerged Ryan Bennett, 32 years old, but somehow looking both older and younger at once. His tailored suit spoke of wealth and position, but the slight hunch of his shoulders betrayed a weight invisible to the eye. "Yes, mother?" he asked, stepping into the room. Dolores didn't turn to look at him. "The Cabot Foundation Gala is next week. I trust you've prepared your speech." Ryan's hand instinctively went to his tie, adjusting it though it sat perfectly. "I have, mother. I've been working on it all week." "Good," Dolores nodded, finally turning her gaze to her son. "Remember, this isn't just about donations. The right words, the right impression. They open doors, Ryan. Doors that lead to opportunities, to power." Ryan nodded, a practiced smile appearing on his face. "I understand, mother. I won't let you down." Dolores's lips curved into what might have been a smile on another face. On hers, it looked more like a crack in marble. "You never do, darling. That's why you're the future of this family." As Ryan left the room, his shoulders seemed to sag further, as if the weight of those words was a physical burden. He made his way to his bedroom, a space that, despite being his since childhood, felt more like a hotel suite than a personal sanctuary. Closing the door behind him, Ryan let out a long breath. He moved to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens of the Bennett estate. Beyond the high stone walls, he could see the lights of Boston twinkling in the early evening darkness. So close, yet so far from the world he inhabited. Ryan's mind drifted back to his childhood, a montage of piano lessons, etiquette classes, and private tutors. While other kids played in the park, he attended charity events on his mother's arm, learning to schmooze with Boston's elite before he could drive. Dolores had molded him into the perfect heir, but at what cost? He remembered the day he'd asked to join the school baseball team. Dolores had looked at him as if he'd suggested burning down the house. "Baseball?" she'd scoffed. "Ryan, darling, Bennetts don't waste time with frivolous pursuits. Your future is in boardrooms, not dugouts. Now let's review your Latin conjugations." And so it went, year after year. Ryan's life was a meticulously planned journey from prep school to Harvard, from internships at prestigious firms to his current position as the youngest partner at Bennett & Associates. He had everything a man could want: wealth, status, respect. Everything except the ability to recognize his own wishes, his own dreams. The sound of his phone buzzing pulled Ryan from his reverie. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him of tomorrow's charity committee meeting at the Boston Public Library. Ryan sighed, then straightened his shoulders. He had a role to play, expectations to meet. The weight settled back onto him like a familiar, if unwelcome, coat. The next day, Ryan found himself climbing the grand staircase of the Boston Public Library. The McKim building was a masterpiece of architecture, its vaulted ceilings and marble halls a fitting backdrop for the city's intellectual pursuits, and of course for the endless round of committee meetings and charity events that filled the social calendars of Boston's upper crust. As he approached the meeting room, Ryan mentally reviewed the agenda. Fundraising strategies, donor recognition, the upcoming gala, all important, all part of the Bennett legacy of philanthropy, all utterly uninspiring to Ryan, though he'd never admit it, even to himself. He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice the young woman until he collided with her, sending the stack of books in her arms clattering to the floor. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Ryan exclaimed, immediately crouching down to help gather the scattered volumes. No, it's my fault," the woman said, her voice warm and tinged with embarrassment. "I wasn't looking where I was going." Ryan looked up, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. The woman kneeling across from him was beautiful, but it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. There was a light in her eyes, a warmth in her smile that seemed to radiate outward, filling the space around her. "I'm Victoria," she said, extending her hand. "Victoria Reeves." "Ryan," he replied, taking her hand. He hesitated for a moment before adding, "Ryan Bennett." He waited for the usual flicker of recognition, the subtle shift in demeanor that always came when people realized who he was. But Victoria's smile didn't change. "Nice to meet you, Ryan," she said, gathering the last of her books. "Are you here for the reading program meeting too?" Ryan blinked, momentarily confused. No. I'm here for the charity committee meeting. Fundraising for the library's new wing." "Oh," Victoria's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. I'm a teacher at the Elliott Elementary School in the North End. We bring our kids here for the reading program. It's amazing to see their eyes light up when they discover a new book." The passion in her voice was palpable, and Ryan found himself smiling. A real smile, not the practiced one he wore at social events. "That sounds incredible," he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I'd love to hear more about it." Victoria glanced at her watch. "Well, my meeting doesn't start for another 15 minutes. Coffee?" Ryan knew he should say no. He had his own meeting to prepare for, papers to review, people to schmooze. But looking at Victoria, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a desire to break free from the script, if only for a few minutes. "I'd love to," he said. As they walked to the library's cafe, Ryan felt a strange lightness in his step. Victoria chatted animatedly about her students, her eyes sparkling as she described their achievements and challenges. Ryan found himself captivated, not just by her words, but by the genuine enthusiasm behind them. Sitting across from her in the cafe, Ryan realized he was seeing a world he'd never really noticed before. Victoria spoke of community centers, of after-school programs, of the struggles and triumphs of families trying to give their children a better future. It was so far removed from the gilded world of galas and boardrooms, yet it felt more real, more vital than anything he'd experienced. "I'm sorry," Victoria said suddenly, blushing slightly. "I've been talking your ear off. You must be bored to tears." "No, not at all," Ryan said quickly. "It's fascinating. I've never really thought about the impact of these programs on a personal level." Victoria tilted her head, studying him. "Well, Mr. Bennett, maybe you should come see for yourself sometime. We're always looking for volunteers to read to the kids." The idea both thrilled and terrified Ryan. He could almost hear his mother's voice, dismissing such activities as a waste of time. But looking at Victoria, he felt a pull towards something he couldn't quite name. "I'd like that," he said, surprising himself once again. As they parted ways, heading to their respective meetings, Ryan felt as if he'd woken from a long sleep. The library hall seemed brighter somehow, filled with possibility. He thought of Victoria's smile, of the passion in her voice, and felt a stirring of something long dormant in his chest. But as he entered the meeting room, seeing the familiar faces of Boston's elite, the weight settled back onto his shoulders. He was Ryan Bennett, heir to the Bennett legacy. He had responsibilities, expectations to meet. Yet, as he took his seat at the head of the table, a small part of him held onto the warmth of his encounter with Victoria, like a secret flame flickering in the cold mansion of his life. Little did Ryan know that this chance meeting would be the pebble that starts an avalanche, setting in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his family, and the meaning of true wealth. As he began the meeting, discussing donation strategies and social events, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered of a different kind of richness, one that couldn't be measured in dollars or social standing. The seed of change had been planted, and in the fertile soil of Ryan's long-suppressed desires, it would soon begin to grow, reaching towards a light he'd never allowed himself to see. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel was a vision in white and gold, filled with the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and the gentle rustle of silk and taffeta. Boston's elite mingled, champagne flutes in hand, their murmured conversations a genteel hum beneath the string quartet's melodies. But all eyes were on the couple at the center of it all, Ryan Bennett and his new bride Victoria. Victoria was radiant in a simple yet elegant gown, her dark hair swept up in a classic chignon, adorned with small white flowers. Her smile was incandescent as she looked up at Ryan, who stood tall and handsome in his tailored tuxedo. To the casual observer, they were the picture of a perfect society wedding. But those who looked closer might have noticed the slight tension in Ryan's jaw, the way his eyes occasionally darted to a figure standing to the side, watching the proceedings with a gaze as cold as the diamonds glittering at her throat. Dolores Bennett stood like a statue, her champagne flute untouched, her steel-gray hair immaculate as always. Her face was a mask of polite interest, but those who knew her well could see the disapproval etched in the tight lines around her mouth. As Ryan and Victoria made their way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, Dolores finally approached. "Darling," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of maternal affection. "What a lovely ceremony. You must be so happy." Ryan's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around Victoria's waist. "We are, Mother. Thank you for being here." Dolores turned her gaze to Victoria, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Welcome to the family, my dear. I do hope you're prepared for the responsibilities that come with being a Bennett." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "I'm looking forward to it, Mrs. Bennett. Ryan and I are excited to start our life together." "Of course you are," Dolores replied, her tone suggesting anything but agreement. "Ryan, darling, don't forget you have that board meeting tomorrow morning. The future of the company doesn't pause for personal celebrations." With that, she glided away, leaving a chill in her wake. Victoria looked up at Ryan, concern evident in her eyes. "On our first day as husband and wife?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, Victoria. It's an important meeting. I can't miss it." Victoria nodded, but the spark in her eyes had dimmed. As they turned to greet more guests, neither noticed Dolores watching from across the room, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. The weeks following the wedding were a whirlwind of society events, charity galas and business functions. Victoria threw herself into her role as Ryan's wife with enthusiasm, determined to prove herself worthy of the Bennett name. But at every turn, she found herself facing Dolores's subtle disapproval and constant reminders of her outsider status. One evening, as Victoria was preparing for yet another charity event, Dolores appeared in the doorway of her dressing room. "That dress, dear," she said, eyeing Victoria's emerald green gown critically. "It's a bit common, don't you think? Perhaps something more befitting a Bennett would be appropriate." Victoria's cheeks flushed, but she stood her ground. "I like this dress, Mrs. Bennett. It's elegant and comfortable." Dolores's eyebrow arched. "Comfort? My dear, a Bennett woman's duty is to present the right image, not to be comfortable. But I suppose you'll learn in time." As Dolores left, Victoria caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked lost, out of place in the opulent surroundings. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to her reflection, "You can do this. You're stronger than she thinks." Meanwhile, Ryan found himself increasingly torn between his love for Victoria and the weight of his family obligations. Each day seemed to bring a new challenge, a new choice between his wife's happiness and his mother's expectations. One Saturday morning, as Ryan was preparing to leave for a golf outing with important clients, Victoria approached him, her eyes shining with excitement. "Ryan, I thought maybe we could go for a picnic in the public garden today. The weather's beautiful, and we haven't had any time to ourselves lately." Ryan's heart sank. He wanted nothing more than to spend the day with Victoria, to see her laugh and relax away from the suffocating atmosphere of the Bennett world. But he could already hear his mother's voice in his head, reminding him of the importance of these business connections. "I'm sorry, Victoria," he said, hating the way her face fell. "I have to meet these clients. It's crucial for the new merger we're working on." Victoria nodded, her disappointment palpable. "Of course, I understand." As Ryan left, he didn't see Victoria sink onto the bed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. He didn't hear her whisper, "Do you, Ryan? Do you really understand?" Months passed, and the cracks in Ryan and Victoria's marriage began to show. Victoria threw herself into her volunteer work at the library and local schools, finding solace in the genuine connections she made there. Ryan buried himself in work, trying to ignore the growing distance between them. One evening, as they prepared for yet another Bennett family dinner, Victoria broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "Ryan, I think we should start trying for a baby." Ryan froze, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. "A baby? Now?" Victoria nodded, her eyes pleading. "Yes, now. I think it would be good for us. To have something that's just ours, you know?" Ryan's mind raced. A part of him longed for the family Victoria described, for a love untainted by expectations and duty, But another part, the part shaped by years of his mother's influence, recoiled at the idea of such a monumental change. "Let's talk about this later," he said, finishing with his tie. "We don't want to be late for dinner." Victoria's face fell, but she nodded, following Ryan out the door. Neither of them noticed Dolores standing in the shadows of the hallway, having overheard every word. The dinner that night was tense, with Dolores dominating the conversation with talk of the Bennett legacy and the importance of maintaining their social standing. As dessert was served, she turned her piercing gaze to Victoria. "So, my dear, when can we expect the pitter-patter of little feet? The Bennett line must continue after all." Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. We're not sure yet, Mrs. Bennett. We're still discussing it." Dolores's eyes narrowed. "Discussing? My dear, there's nothing to discuss. It's your duty as a Bennett wife to provide an heir, unless, of course, there's some problem." The room fell silent, the accusation hanging in the air like a poisonous cloud. Ryan sat frozen, torn between defending his wife and appeasing his mother. In the end, he said nothing, and Victoria felt the weight of his silence like a physical blow. From that moment on, the pressure to conceive became all-consuming. Victoria underwent test after test, each negative result driving her further into despair. Ryan tried to be supportive, but his own fears and doubts, fueled by his mother's constant insinuations, created a wedge between them. One crisp autumn morning, Victoria sat in a sterile doctor's office, clutching a piece of paper that seemed to weigh a ton. The doctor's words echoed in her head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett, but it appears you may be infertile." With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone to call Ryan, but paused when she saw a text from him. "Can't talk now. In important meeting. See you at home." Fighting back tears, Victoria left the doctor's office, the diagnosis burning a hole in her pocket. She walked aimlessly through the streets of Boston, ending up at the public garden where she and Ryan had shared so many happy moments early in their relationship. Sitting on a bench, watching families stroll by, she allowed herself to cry, mourning the future she'd dreamed of. What Victoria didn't know was that Dolores had her own network of informants, including several at the city's top medical facilities. By the time Victoria arrived home that evening, Dolores was already aware of the diagnosis and was formulating a plan. Over the next few weeks, Dolores began a subtle campaign of manipulation. She filled Ryan's ears with talk of the importance of children to carry on the Bennett name. She arranged for family friends with young children to visit, watching with calculated interest as Ryan interacted with them. And all the while, she dropped hints about Victoria's failure to conceive. "It's such a shame," she would say, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Poor Victoria. But you must think of the family, Ryan. The Bennett line has continued unbroken for generations. We can't let it end with you." Ryan, caught between his love for Victoria and the weight of family expectations, began to withdraw. He spent more time at work, avoiding the tension at home. Victoria, sensing his distance, tried desperately to bridge the gap between them. One evening, as they sat in the oppressive silence of their bedroom, Victoria reached for Ryan's hand. "I was thinking," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "maybe we could look into adoption. There are so many children who need loving homes." Ryan pulled his hand away, not meeting her eyes. "Adoption? Victoria, you know it's not the same. The Bennett name." "The Bennett name," Victoria repeated, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Is that all that matters? What about love, Ryan? What about building a family together, regardless of blood?" Ryan stood abruptly, pacing the room. "You don't understand. This isn't just about us. It's about legacy, about responsibility. I can't just turn my back on generations of tradition." Victoria felt something break inside her. "And what about your responsibility to me, Ryan? To our marriage? Or does that not matter in the grand scheme of the Bennett legacy?" The argument that followed was brutal, laying bare all the cracks and fissures that had been growing in their relationship. Words were said that couldn't be taken back, wounds inflicted that would leave lasting scars. In the days that followed, Ryan threw himself into work with renewed vigor, while Victoria retreated into herself, spending more and more time volunteering at the library, finding solace in the simple joy of reading to children who didn't care about her last name or her ability to bear children. Dolores, meanwhile, continued her campaign of subtle destruction. She arranged for Ryan to meet with a series of young, eligible women from good families, always under the guise of business meetings or charity events. She filled his head with talk of duty and legacy, slowly chipping away at his resolve. The final blow came on a cold winter evening, as Ryan and Victoria prepared for the annual Bennett Foundation Gala. Victoria, dressed in a stunning blue gown, was a vision of elegance and grace. But as she descended the stairs, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. "Ryan, darling," Dolores was saying, her voice low and urgent, "you must think of the future. Victoria, she's a lovely girl, but she can't give you what you need. What the family needs, it's time to consider other options." Victoria froze, her heart pounding. She waited for Ryan to defend her, to stand up to his mother, but the silence that followed was deafening. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice was resigned, defeated. "You're right, Mother, I'll think about it." Victoria felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. She stumbled back up the stairs, tears blurring her vision. By the time Ryan came to find her, she had packed a small bag. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Ryan asked, his face pale. "What does it look like, Ryan?" Victoria replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep trying to fit into a world that doesn't want me, to live up to expectations that are impossible to meet." Ryan reached for her, panic in his eyes. "Victoria, please, we can work this out. I love you." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in months. "Do you, Ryan? Do you love me more than your name, your legacy, your mother's approval? Because if you did, we wouldn't be here right now." Ryan's silence was all the answer she needed. With a sad smile, Victoria picked up her bag. "Goodbye, Ryan, I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked out of the Bennett mansion for the last time, Victoria felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but for the first time in years she felt like she could breathe. Back in the mansion, Ryan stood frozen, watching the door close behind the woman he loved. He felt a presence behind him and turned to see his mother, a look of triumph poorly disguised as concern on her face. "It's for the best, darling," Dolores said, placing a hand on his arm. "Now we can focus on securing the future of the Bennett line. I've already spoken to our lawyers about expediting the divorce proceedings." Ryan nodded numbly, feeling as if he was watching his life unfold from a great distance. He had made his choice, chosen duty over love, family legacy over personal happiness. As he followed his mother into the study to discuss the details of the divorce, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But the wheels were in motion now, and Ryan Bennett, heir to the Bennett fortune and legacy, was once again firmly under his mother's control. The fairy tale romance that had begun with a chance meeting in a library had come to an end, leaving behind broken hearts and shattered dreams. As news of the Bennett divorce spread through Boston's high society, few knew the real story behind the split. Fewer still could have predicted the storm that was brewing, a tempest that would shake the very foundations of the Bennett empire and force Ryan to confront the true cost of his choices. The bustling streets of New York City were a far cry from the manicured lawns and whispered gossip of Boston's elite circles. Victoria Reeves, no longer Bennett, stepped off the bus at Port Authority, a single suitcase in hand and uncertainty etched across her face. The cacophony of honking horns, street vendors' calls, and the general hum of 8 million lives in motion washed over her like a wave, simultaneously overwhelming and oddly comforting. "New city, new life," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders and joining the flow of pedestrians on 8th Avenue. Victoria had chosen New York for its anonymity. Here, she wasn't the failed Bennett bride or the subject of hushed conversations at charity galas. She was just another face in the crowd, another dreamer trying to make it in the big city. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Her first few weeks were a blur of small triumphs and daunting challenges. She found a tiny studio apartment in Astoria, Queens, a far cry from the Bennett mansion, but it was hers. The rattling radiator and temperamental plumbing were constant reminders of her new reality, but as she curled up on her second-hand couch each night, she felt a sense of pride she'd never experienced in the gilded cage of her former life. Finding work proved to be more difficult. Her degree in education and experience volunteering in Boston schools didn't immediately open doors in the competitive New York job market, but Victoria was nothing if not persistent. She took a job as a barista at a small coffee shop in her neighborhood, working early mornings and late nights, saving every penny she could. It was during one of these late-night shifts, as she was wiping down tables and fighting waves of exhaustion, that Victoria first felt it, a slight fluttering in her abdomen, like the brush of butterfly wings. She froze, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. Could it be? But the doctors had said. The next morning found Victoria pacing the tiny bathroom of her apartment, a pregnancy test clutched in her trembling hands. As the minutes ticked by, she found herself fluctuating between hope and fear. When she finally looked down at the test, the two pink lines staring back at her seemed to hold the weight of the world. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and trepidation. Then louder as a smile began to spread across her face. "I'm pregnant." She laughed, she cried, she danced around her tiny apartment, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. But as the initial euphoria faded, reality began to set in. She was alone in a new city, working a minimum wage job, with a baby on the way. The enormity of the challenge ahead was daunting, but Victoria set her jaw with determination. She had survived the Bennett world. She could survive this too. The following months were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, budget adjustments, and preparations. Victoria picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, squirreling away every extra dollar. She scoured thrift stores and online marketplaces for baby essentials, turning her tiny studio into a cozy nest for her growing family. It was during her 5th month, at a routine ultrasound, that Victoria received another shock. The technician moved the wand over her swollen belly, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Ms. Reeves," she said, turning the screen towards Victoria. "I hope you're ready for double the love. You're having twins." Victoria's eyes widened as she stared at the screen, at the two distinct shapes moving within her. Twins, 2 babies. For a moment she felt a wave of panic. How could she possibly manage 2 babies on her own? But as she watched the grainy images, saw the tiny hands and feet moving, she felt a surge of love so powerful it took her breath away. "Hello, my little ones," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to be just fine." The remainder of her pregnancy was challenging. Her feet swelled, her back ached, and some days it felt like the twins were using her bladder as a trampoline. But Victoria persevered. She found a support group for single mothers, making friends who became like family. Her co-workers at the coffee shop rallied around her, covering shifts when she had doctor's appointments and throwing her a surprise baby shower. On a crisp autumn morning, after 18 hours of labor that tested every ounce of her strength and resolve, Victoria gave birth to 2 beautiful baby boys. As she held them in her arms, their tiny fingers curling around hers, she felt a love she had never known possible. "Henry," she said, looking at the older twin with a tuft of dark hair. "And Owen," she added, smiling at the younger one, already showing signs of the same stubborn chin she saw in the mirror every day. "Welcome to the world, my brave boys." The first year was a blur of sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and moments of joy so pure they made her heart ache. Victoria learned to function on minimal sleep, to change 2 diapers with the efficiency of a pit crew, and to cherish every milestone no matter how small. She also learned the true meaning of sacrifice. Her dreams of returning to teaching were put on hold as she juggled multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. There were nights when she ate nothing but ramen noodles so she could afford better food for the boys. But every time Henry laughed or Owen took a wobbly step, she knew it was all worth it. As the twins grew, so did Victoria's determination to provide them with a good life. She took online classes in the dead of night after the boys were asleep, slowly working towards a master's degree in education. She moved them to a slightly larger apartment in a better school district, taking on tutoring jobs to cover the increased rent. By the time Henry and Owen were ready to start school, Victoria had secured a position as a kindergarten teacher at a public school in Queens. It wasn't a prestigious private school like she'd once dreamed of, but the joy she felt helping young minds blossom was beyond compare. Life settled into a rhythm. Mornings were a whirlwind of getting 2 energetic boys fed, dressed and off to school, before rushing to her own classroom. Evenings were filled with homework, story time, and the simple pleasures of family life. It wasn't always easy, but it was real, and it was theirs. As she watched her sons grow, Victoria sometimes caught glimpses of Ryan in them. Henry had his father's thoughtful frown when concentrating, while Owen shared Ryan's easy charm. In these moments, a familiar ache would bloom in her chest, but she had made peace with her past. Ryan had made his choice, and she had made hers. The life she had built with her boys was more precious to her than any fortune or social status. Meanwhile, back in Boston, Ryan Bennett's life had taken a very different trajectory. In the wake of Victoria's departure, he had thrown himself into work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. Under his leadership, Bennett and Associates expanded rapidly, acquiring smaller firms and branching into new markets. From the outside, Ryan appeared to be the very picture of success. He was named one of Boston's most eligible bachelors, a fixture at high-profile events and charity galas. His mother, Dolores, basked in the glow of his achievements, never missing an opportunity to remind everyone of the Bennett legacy. But behind closed doors, Ryan was a man haunted by regret. The Bennett mansion, once a symbol of pride and tradition, now felt like a mausoleum. He rattled around its empty rooms, the silence broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock and the echo of his own footsteps. Dolores's attempts to introduce him to suitable young women from their social circle fell flat. Ryan went through the motions, attending dinners and events, but his heart wasn't in it. Each vapid conversation about stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons only served to remind him of Victoria's warmth and genuine spirit. One evening, after a particularly soul-crushing charity auction, Ryan found himself standing in front of the library in his home. It was a room he had avoided since Victoria left, the memories too painful. But tonight, something drew him in. He ran his fingers along the spines of the books, remembering how Victoria's eyes would light up when discussing her favorite novels. His hand paused on a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. He pulled it from the shelf, a slip of paper falling to the floor as he did. Bending to pick it up, he recognized Victoria's handwriting. Ryan, this book reminds me of you, of the man I know you can be. Strong, just, willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I love you. Always, Victoria. Ryan sank into a nearby chair, the note clutched in his trembling hand. For the first time since she left, he allowed himself to really feel the weight of what he had lost. The tears came then, hot and bitter, years of suppressed emotion pouring out of him. As dawn broke, Ryan stood at the window of his study, watching the city come to life. He felt hollowed out, but also strangely lighter, as if the tears had washed away some of the hardness that had encrusted his heart over the years. I need to make a change, he said to his reflection in the window, but the thought of disappointing his mother, of stepping away from the life that had been planned for him since birth, was paralyzing. So he did what he had always done. He buried his feelings and went back to work. Years passed. Ryan's professional success continued to grow, but the emptiness inside him expanded in equal measure. He became known for his shrewd business acumen, but also for his cold demeanor. The warm, caring man Victoria had fallen in love with was buried deep, hidden behind a facade of corporate efficiency. It was 7 years to the day since Victoria had left when Ryan found himself in New York for a business conference. The meetings had been long and tedious, full of PowerPoint presentations and budget projections. As the day's sessions finally came to a close, Ryan felt suffocated by the sterile hotel environment. On an impulse, he decided to take a walk to clear his head. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind that seemed to breathe life back into the world after a long winter. Without really thinking about it, he found himself entering Central Park. As he walked along the winding paths, Ryan felt some of the tension leaving his body. The sound of children laughing drew his attention to a nearby playground. He paused, watching the kids run and play with a wistfulness he didn't quite understand. That's when he saw her. Victoria was sitting on a bench, a book open on her lap, but her attention was on the playground. She was smiling, her face lit up with a joy Ryan had never seen before. She looked different. Her hair was shorter, and there were little lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Ryan's heart began to race. Should he approach her? What would he say after all these years? As he stood frozen in indecision, his eyes were drawn to two boys running towards Victoria. They looked to be about 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair and familiar features that made Ryan's breath catch in his throat. "Mom!" one of the boys called out. "Did you see how high I got on the swings?" Victoria laughed, a sound that pierced Ryan's heart. "I saw, Henry. You were flying." The other boy, slightly shorter but with the same determined set to his jaw, chimed in. "I went higher, Mom, didn't I, Owen?" Ryan felt the world tilt around him. Henry and Owen. 2 boys, the same age Victoria's pregnancy would have produced. 2 boys who looked so achingly familiar. As if in a dream, Ryan found himself walking towards them. Victoria looked up, her smile fading as she recognized him. She stood quickly, positioning herself in front of the boys. "Ryan," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Victoria," he replied, his eyes moving from her face to the boys and back again. Are they—" Victoria took a deep breath, her arms going protectively around the boys' shoulders. "Yes, Ryan. This is Henry and Owen, your sons." The world seemed to stop. Ryan stared at the boys, at his sons, taking in every detail of their faces. Henry, with his serious eyes that looked so much like his own. Owen, with Victoria's nose and the dimple in his cheek that Ryan recognized from his own childhood photos. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over him. Joy, regret, fear, love. The magnitude of what he had lost, of the years he could never get back, hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Hi," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm Ryan." The boys looked at him curiously, then up at their mother. Victoria's face was a study in conflicting emotions, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Boys, this is an old friend of Mommy's, from Boston." Ryan felt the weight of everything unsaid in those simple words. An old friend, not their father, not the man who should have been there for every skinned knee, every bedtime story, every triumph and tear. As Henry politely said hello and Owen gave a little wave, Ryan was struck by the sudden devastating realization of the life he could have had, the life he had thrown away. These beautiful, vibrant boys were his sons, and he was a stranger to them. The playground noise faded away, the bustling park becoming a blur around them. In that moment, standing on a patch of grass in Central Park, Ryan Bennett's carefully constructed world shattered. The facade he had maintained for 7 years crumbled, leaving him raw and exposed. As he looked at Victoria and the boys, his family, Ryan knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The path forward was unclear, fraught with complications and potential heartbreak, but for the first time in years, he felt something stir within him, a determination to make things right, no matter the cost. The sun was setting over the New York skyline, casting long shadows across the park. As the little family and the man who had just discovered his place in it stood in a tableau of shocked silence, the fading light seemed to herald the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. The story of the Bennetts was far from over, and its most challenging and transformative act was about to begin. The New York City summer hung heavy in the air, the heat amplifying the tension that had settled over Victoria's small apartment in Queens. It had been 3 weeks since the chance encounter in Central Park, and Ryan's sudden reappearance in their lives had thrown everything into disarray. Victoria stood at the kitchen sink, mechanically washing dishes as she replayed their latest conversation in her mind. Ryan's voice, tinged with desperation, echoed in her thoughts. "Please, Victoria, I just want a chance to know them, to be a part of their lives." She had been firm, her protective instincts on high alert. "It's not that simple, Ryan. You can't just walk in after 7 years and expect everything to be okay." Now, as she dried her hands on a worn dish towel, Victoria glanced at the twins playing in the living room. Henry was engrossed in a book, his brow furrowed in concentration, while Owen built an elaborate structure with Legos. Her heart swelled with love and fierce protectiveness. A gentle knock on the door broke through her reverie. Victoria opened it to find Andrew, her neighbor and friend, holding a paper bag. "Hey," he said, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "I thought you could use some reinforcements." He held up the bag, the aroma of fresh bagels wafting through the air. Victoria felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Andrew, you're a lifesaver." As they settled at the small kitchen table, the boys racing over at the promise of their favorite treats, Andrew studied Victoria's face. "Rough morning?" She nodded, taking a sip of the coffee he'd brought. Ryan called again. He wants to take the boys to a baseball game next weekend. Andrew's expression turned serious. "And how do you feel about that?" Victoria sighed, watching as Henry and Owen enthusiastically devoured their bagels. "I don't know. Part of me wants to keep them as far away from him as possible, to protect them from getting hurt if he decides to disappear again." She paused, conflict evident in her eyes. But another part, they deserve to know their father, don't they? Andrew reached across the table, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. There's no easy answer, Victoria, but I know you'll do what's best for the boys. You always do. As Andrew helped the twins with their summer reading assignments, Victoria retreated to her bedroom, Ryan's business card burning a hole in her pocket. She stared at the number for a long moment before finally dialing. Hello? Ryan's voice was tentative, hopeful. Victoria took a deep breath. Okay, Ryan, one afternoon, but I'll be there too. And if at any point I feel it's too much for the boys, we leave. No questions asked. The relief in Ryan's voice was palpable. Thank you, Victoria. You won't regret this. As she hung up, Victoria wasn't so sure. Meanwhile, in Boston, Dolores Bennett sat in her immaculate study, her face a mask of cold fury as she listened to her private investigator's report. So, it's true, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. That girl trapped Ryan with not one but two illegitimate children. The investigator shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Bennett, from what we've gathered, Ms. Reeves never informed Mr. Bennett of the pregnancy. She's been raising the children on her own, working as a teacher in Queens. Dolores waved a dismissive hand. Details. What matters is that this situation threatens everything we've built. The Bennett legacy cannot be tainted by some common woman and her bastard children. She stood moving to the window with a predatory grace. Find out everything you can about her life in New York, her job, her friends, any weaknesses we can exploit. I will not allow this to destroy my son's future. As Dolores plotted, oblivious to the irony of potentially destroying her son's chance at true happiness, Ryan was on a plane to New York, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. The day of the baseball game dawned bright and clear. Victoria watched with a mixture of emotions as Ryan awkwardly introduced himself to the twins, who regarded him with curious eyes. So, you're our dad? Owen asked bluntly, causing Ryan to flinch slightly. Yes, I am, Ryan replied, his voice thick with emotion. Henry, ever the peacemaker, sensed the tension. Do you like the Yankees or the Mets? Ryan smiled, grateful for the easy question. Well, I'm from Boston, so I'm actually a Red Sox fan, but today I think I can cheer for the Yankees. As they made their way to their seats, Victoria couldn't help but notice the way Ryan kept glancing at the boys, drinking in every detail. She saw the regret in his eyes, the longing, and felt her resolve waver slightly. The afternoon unfolded with moments of awkwardness, interspersed with flashes of genuine connection. Ryan patiently explained the intricacies of the game to the twins, his face lighting up when Owen cheered for a home run, or when Henry asked an insightful question about strategy. Victoria found herself watching Ryan as much as the game. This man, with his designer watch and tailored casual wear, seemed a far cry from the Ryan she had known, yet there were moments, a certain laugh, a gesture, that reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. As they left the stadium, Henry tugged on Ryan's sleeve. Dad, can we do this again sometime? The word dad hung in the air, charged with meaning. Ryan looked at Victoria, hope and uncertainty warring in his eyes. Victoria felt her heart constrict. We'll see, honey. Maybe. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Victoria sat on her small balcony, trying to sort through her tumultuous emotions. The sound of a text message drew her attention. It was from Ryan. Thank you for today. They're incredible, Victoria. You've done an amazing job with them. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. She typed back a simple, thank you, before turning off her phone and letting the tears fall freely. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became a more frequent presence in their lives. He attended Henry's science fair, cheered at Owen's soccer game, and even helped with homework over video calls. Victoria watched with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation as the boys grew more comfortable with him. But as Ryan worked to build a relationship with his sons, he found himself increasingly at odds with the life he had left behind in Boston. Dolores's calls became more frequent, her thinly veiled disapproval evident in every word. Ryan, darling, she said during one particularly tense call, I understand you feel some obligation to these children, but you mustn't forget your responsibilities here. The company needs you, the family needs you. Ryan felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. Mother, they're my sons. I've already missed so much of their lives, I can't abandon them again. Dolores's voice turned cold. Don't be dramatic, Ryan. No one's asking you to abandon them. A trust fund, perhaps some shares in the company when they're older. That's more than generous for children of their background. The old Ryan would have acquiesced, would have found a way to rationalize his mother's words. But as he thought of Henry's serious eyes and Owen's mischievous grin, he felt something shift inside him. "No, Mother," he said, his voice stronger than he could ever remember it being when speaking to her. "They're not a problem to be managed. They're my children, and I intend to be a real father to them." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Dolores spoke again, her voice was like ice. "I see. Well, when you're done playing house in New York, your real life will be waiting for you here." As Ryan hung up, he felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in his life, he had stood up to his mother. The path ahead was uncertain, but he knew he couldn't go back to the life he had been living. Meanwhile, Victoria was facing challenges of her own. Word had spread at her school about Ryan's reappearance, bringing with it a wave of gossip and speculation. She overheard whispers in the teacher's lounge, caught curious glances in the hallways. One afternoon, she was cornered by Diane, a fellow teacher with a penchant for drama. "Victoria, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Is it true? Has the long-lost father of your boys finally decided to grace you with his presence?" Victoria felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high. "My personal life is just that, Diane. Personal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a class to teach." As she walked away, Victoria felt a familiar presence at her side. It was Andrew, his steady gaze a balm to her frayed nerves. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Victoria nodded, managing a small smile. "I will be, it's just everything's changing so fast. Sometimes I feel like I can barely keep up." Andrew's hand found hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You're stronger than you know, Victoria, and you're not alone in this." His words and the unwavering support behind them gave Victoria the strength to face the challenges ahead. As summer turned to fall, Ryan made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. He rented an apartment in New York, announcing his intention to split his time between there and Boston. The news hit Dolores like a thunderbolt. She arrived in New York unannounced, her appearance on Victoria's doorstep sending a chill down the younger woman's spine. "Mrs. Bennet," Victoria said, her voice carefully neutral, "this is unexpected." Dolores's eyes swept dismissively over the modest apartment. "Indeed. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but it seems my son has lost his senses. I'm here to put an end to this charade." Victoria felt her protective instincts flare. "With all due respect, Mrs. Bennet, there's no charade here. Just a father getting to know his children." Dolores's laugh was cold and brittle. "Oh, my dear, surely you don't think this can last. Ryan has responsibilities, a legacy to uphold. He can't throw it all away for some mistake from the past." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. "Henry and Owen are not a mistake. They're bright, wonderful boys who deserve to know their father. And Ryan? He's finally becoming the man I always knew he could be." The two women stood toe to toe, neither willing to back down. The tension was broken by the sound of the front door opening. "Mom, we're home," Owen's voice called out, followed by the sound of 2 pairs of feet running down the hall. The boys skidded to a stop as they took in the scene before them. Ryan, who had picked them up from soccer practice, appeared behind them, his face darkening as he saw his mother. "Mother," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing here?" Dolores turned, a practiced smile on her face. "Ryan, darling, I thought it was time I met my grandsons." The way she said the word, like it left a bad taste in her mouth, made Victoria's blood boil. But before she could speak, Ryan stepped forward, placing himself between his mother and his family. "No, Mother," he said, his voice firm, "not like this. Not with your schemes and manipulations. If you can't accept my children and Victoria as they are, then you have no place in our lives." Dolores recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "Ryan, have you lost your mind? Everything I've done for you, for our family." Ryan shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "No, Mother. You've done it for yourself, for your vision of what our family should be. But that's not the family I want anymore." As Dolores stormed out, hurling threats of disinheritance and ruin, Ryan turned to Victoria and the boys. The 4 of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over them. It was Henry who broke the silence. "Dad, are you okay?" Ryan knelt down, pulling both boys into a hug. "I'm more than okay, buddy. I'm exactly where I need to be." Victoria watched the scene unfold, her heart a tangle of emotions. As Ryan looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of apology, hope, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. She realized that their journey was far from over. The months that followed were a period of profound change and growth for all of them. Ryan threw himself into fatherhood with a dedication that both surprised and moved Victoria. He was there for late-night science project emergencies, for Saturday morning cartoons, for skinned knees and triumphant goals. Victoria watched as the boys blossomed under the added attention, even as she grappled with her own conflicting emotions. The pain of the past still lingered, but seeing Ryan with Henry and Owen, she couldn't deny the positive impact he was having on their lives. One evening, as they sat on the balcony after the boys had gone to bed, Ryan turned to Victoria, his expression serious. "I know I can never make up for the years I missed," he said softly, "but I want you to know how grateful I am that you've allowed me into their lives, into your life." Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking out over the city lights. "It hasn't been easy, Ryan. There are days when I look at you with them, and all I can think about is how much they needed you when they were babies, how much I needed you." Ryan's face crumpled with regret. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for that. But Victoria, being here, being with them, with you, it's made me realize how empty my life was before, how wrong I was to let you go." Victoria felt her heart rate quicken. "Ryan," he held up a hand, "I'm not asking for anything, Victoria. I know I have a lot to prove, to you and to the boys. I just want you to know that I'm here, really here, for all of you, whatever that means." As they sat in companionable silence, Victoria felt something shift inside her. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble just a little. Meanwhile, Andrew watched the changing dynamics with a bittersweet smile. He had always known that his relationship with Victoria and the boys was temporary, a safe harbor in the storm. As he saw the family coming together, he knew it was time for him to step back. One afternoon, as he helped Victoria prepare dinner, he broached the subject. "So, things seem to be going well with Ryan and the boys." Victoria nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "They are. It's not perfect, but it's good. The boys are so happy to have him in their lives." Andrew hesitated before asking, "And you? How do you feel about having Ryan back in your life?" Victoria put down the knife she was using, turning to face him. "It's complicated. There's still a lot of hurt, a lot of trust to rebuild. But seeing him with Henry and Owen, seeing how hard he's trying, I can't deny that it's stirring up old feelings." Andrew nodded, his eyes kind. "You deserve happiness, Victoria. All of you do. And if that happiness includes Ryan, well, I think that's beautiful." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized what Andrew was doing. "You've been such an amazing friend, Andrew. I don't know how we would have made it through these past years without you." Andrew pulled her into a hug. "You're stronger than you know, Victoria. You would have been fine. But I'm glad I could be here for you and the boys, and I always will be, just in a different way now." As they pulled apart, both wiping away tears, Victoria felt a profound gratitude for this man who had been a rock for her family, even as he prepared to step aside. The journey of healing and reconciliation was not without its challenges. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt. Ryan struggled to balance his new life in New York with his responsibilities in Boston, often feeling torn between two worlds. Victoria grappled with allowing herself to trust again, to believe that this time Ryan was truly committed to their family. The boys, while thrilled to have their father in their lives, sometimes struggled with the adjustment, their emotions swinging between excitement and confusion. But through it all, they persevered. Family therapy sessions, though sometimes painful, helped them navigate the complex emotions and dynamics at play. Slowly but surely, they began to forge a new kind of family unit, one built on honesty, forgiveness, and a deep, abiding love. As for Dolores, she remained a shadow on the periphery of their lives. Her attempts to manipulate the situation from afar were met with a united front from Ryan and Victoria. It was a painful break for Ryan, years of conditioning and emotional manipulation difficult to overcome. But with each day that passed, each moment of joy shared with his sons, he found the strength to stand firm in his choices. One crisp autumn day, almost a year after that fateful meeting in Central Park, the family decided to revisit the place where their new journey had begun. As they walked along the familiar paths, Henry and Owen raced ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees. Ryan and Victoria strolled behind them, a comfortable silence between them. It's hard to believe how much has changed in a year, Victoria mused, watching the boys with a soft smile. Ryan nodded, his eyes following his son's. I know. Sometimes I wake up and can't believe this is my life now, that I get to be part of this. They paused at the spot where they had reunited a year ago. The playground was still there, filled with the sounds of children playing. But for Ryan and Victoria, it felt like a different world entirely. Victoria, Ryan said, turning to face her. I know we've come a long way, but I want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul. You and the boys, you're everything to me now. Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. She looked into Ryan's eyes, seeing the sincerity, the love, and the lingering hint of fear that he might still lose all of this. Ryan, she began, her voice soft but steady, this past year hasn't been easy. There were times when I wasn't sure we could make it work, when the pain of the past seemed too much to overcome. Ryan's face fell slightly, but Victoria reached out, taking his hand in hers. But watching you with Henry and Owen, seeing how hard you've worked to be there for them, to be the father they deserve, it's shown me a side of you I always hoped existed. She took a deep breath, tears shimmering in her eyes. I can't promise that everything will be perfect. We still have a lot to work through, but I'm willing to try, Ryan, to see where this journey takes us. Ryan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He pulled Victoria into a gentle embrace, mindful of the public setting, but unable to contain the joy and relief he felt. That's all I ask for, he whispered, a chance to prove myself, to be the man you and the boys deserve. As they stood there, holding each other in the place where their new beginning had started, they heard the boys calling out to them. Mom, Dad, come on, we want to show you something. Ryan and Victoria broke apart, sharing a smile before walking hand in hand towards their sons. As they approached, they saw that Henry and Owen had built an elaborate sand castle in the playground sandbox. Look, Owen exclaimed proudly. It's our family. Sure enough, the boys had created 4 lumpy sand figures standing in front of a misshapen sandhouse. It wasn't a masterpiece by any means, but to Ryan and Victoria, it was the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. It's perfect, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan knelt down beside the boys, taking in every detail of their creation. It sure is, guys. It's absolutely perfect. As the family stood together, admiring the sandcastle and laughing at the boys' enthusiastic explanations of each detail, they were unaware of the figure watching them from a distance. Dolores Bennett stood beneath a nearby tree, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. She had come to make one last attempt at bringing Ryan back into the fold, to remind him of his duties and the life he was leaving behind. But as she watched the scene unfold before her, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she saw the joy on her son's face, a genuine happiness she couldn't remember ever seeing before. She saw the love in his eyes as he looked at Victoria and the boys, the easy affection between them all. And in that moment, Dolores Bennett realized that she had a choice to make. She could continue to fight against this new reality, to cling to her vision of what the Bennett family should be, or she could accept that her son had found a different kind of wealth, a different kind of success, that she had never allowed herself to value. With a heavy sigh, Dolores turned away from the scene. She had a lot to think about, a lifetime of beliefs and behaviors to reconsider. It wouldn't be easy, and she wasn't sure she was ready to fully embrace this new family dynamic. But as she walked away, leaving her son and his family to their happiness, she felt the first stirrings of change within herself. Back at the sandbox, unaware of the silent witness to their joy, Ryan, Victoria, Henry, and Owen continued to laugh and play together. They were building more than just a sandcastle. They were building a future, one grain at a time. As the sun began to set over Central Park, casting a golden glow over the little family, it seemed to signal the dawn of a new era. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but together they were ready to face whatever came their way. The Bennett family saga was far from over, but this chapter, a chapter of healing, growth, and newfound love, was one that would shape all the stories yet to come. The autumn chill in the air seemed to mirror the tension that had descended upon the Bennett family. What had been a period of healing and reconnection was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. It began with a letter, innocuous in its plain white envelope, but carrying the weight of a bomb. Victoria's hands trembled as she read the contents, her face draining of color. Ryan, who had been helping the twins with their homework at the kitchen table, noticed her distress immediately. "Victoria, what is it?" he asked, concern etching his features. She looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. It's from your mother's lawyers. She's suing for custody of Henry and Owen." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ryan felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She can't do that. She has no right." But as they would soon discover, Dolores Bennett was prepared to claim every right she could manufacture. The lawsuit alleged that Victoria had deliberately kept the twins from their rightful family, denying them their heritage and the opportunities that came with the Bennett name. It painted Ryan as a victim of manipulation, coerced into abandoning his responsibilities in Boston. The allegations were ludicrous, but they were just the opening salvo in what would become a brutal legal battle. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Ryan and Victoria found themselves thrust into a world of legal jargon and courtroom strategies. They hired the best lawyer they could afford, a sharp-minded woman named Samantha Reeves, no relation to Victoria, who specialized in complex family law cases. As they sat in Samantha's office, surrounded by law books and the faint smell of coffee, the gravity of their situation began to sink in. "I won't sugarcoat this," Samantha said, her gaze steady as she looked at Ryan and Victoria. "Your mother, Mr. Bennett, has significant resources at her disposal. She's hired a top-tier legal team, and they're going to throw everything they have at this case." Victoria felt Ryan's hand tighten around hers. "But they can't win, can they?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "I'm their mother. I've raised them their whole lives." Samantha's expression softened slightly. "You have a strong case, absolutely. But custody battles are never simple, especially when there's this much money involved. We need to be prepared for a fight." And a fight it was. The initial hearing was set for early December, giving them just over a month to prepare. In that time, their lives were turned upside down. Every aspect of Victoria's life was scrutinized: her job, her finances, her relationships. The lawyers dug into her past, looking for any hint of impropriety or instability. Ryan wasn't spared either. His recent split from the family business, his sudden move to New York, his years of absence from the twins' lives, all of it was dissected and analyzed, often in the most unflattering light possible. The strain began to show on all of them. Victoria threw herself into gathering character witnesses and documentation of her life with the boys. She reached out to teachers, neighbors, even the parents of Henry and Owen's friends, asking for statements, attesting to her capabilities as a mother. Ryan, for his part, was a man torn in two. He spent hours on the phone with the company in Boston, trying to maintain his professional responsibilities while also preparing for the court battle. The stress etched new lines on his face, and he often went days without proper sleep. But perhaps the heaviest toll was on Henry and Owen themselves. At 7 years old, they were old enough to sense the tension, to know that something was terribly wrong, but too young to fully understand the complexities of the situation. One evening, as Victoria was tucking them into bed, Owen looked up at her with wide, worried eyes. "Mom, are we in trouble? Did we do something bad?" Victoria's heart clenched. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulling both boys close to her. "No, sweethearts. You haven't done anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that are complicated." Henry, always the more perceptive of the two, frowned. "Is it because of Dad? Is he going to leave again?" The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, honey, your dad loves you both very much. He's not going anywhere. We're all going to get through this together, okay?" As she held her sons, feeling their small bodies gradually relax into sleep, Victoria allowed herself a moment of quiet tears. The unfairness of it all, the idea that these innocent boys might be torn away from the only life they'd ever known, was almost too much to bear. The day of the initial hearing arrived with a sense of foreboding. The New York family court building loomed before them, its stark architecture a fitting backdrop for the battle to come. As they climbed the steps, Ryan and Victoria presented a united front, their hands clasped tightly together. Inside, the courtroom was a sea of dark suits and tense faces, and there, sitting ramrod straight in the front row, was Dolores Bennett. As Ryan and Victoria entered, her eyes locked onto them, her gaze as cold and unyielding as ever. The proceedings began. and it quickly became clear that this would be no easy fight. Dolores's lawyers painted a picture of Victoria as an opportunist, a woman who had deliberately kept the existence of the twins from their rightful family. They spoke of the opportunities the boys were being denied, the legacy they were being kept from. Victoria felt sick as she listened to her life, her love for her children, being twisted and distorted. She gripped Ryan's hand so tightly she feared she might break bones, but he didn't flinch, his steady presence a lifeline in the storm. When it was their turn, Samantha presented their case with precision and passion. She spoke of Victoria's unwavering dedication to her sons, of the stable and loving home she had provided. She presented documentation of the boys' academic achievements, their involvement in community activities, all evidence of a well-rounded and happy childhood. As for Ryan, Samantha didn't shy away from his past absence, but instead focused on his recent actions. His move to New York, his active involvement in the boys' lives, his willingness to reshape his entire life to be there for his family. All of it was laid out for the court to see. The judge, a stern-faced woman with graying hair and piercing eyes, listened to both sides without betraying any emotion. When the arguments were concluded, she spoke for the first time. "This is clearly a complex case with significant factors to consider. I'm ordering a full evaluation of both households, including interviews with the children. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a full hearing." As they left the courtroom, Ryan and Victoria felt a mix of relief and dread. They had survived the first round, but the real battle was yet to come. The next month was a blur of home visits, interviews, and mounting anxiety. Social workers came to observe their interactions with the boys. Psychologists asked probing questions about their family dynamics. Every aspect of their lives was put under a microscope. Through it all, Ryan and Victoria tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for Henry and Owen. They helped with homework, attended soccer games, and tried to shield the boys from the worst of the stress. But children are perceptive, and the twins couldn't help but pick up on the tension. One particularly difficult evening, after a grueling day of depositions, Ryan found Henry sitting alone in the living room, hugging his knees to his chest. "Hey, buddy," Ryan said softly, sitting down next to his son. "What's going on?" Henry looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, is Grandma trying to take us away?" Ryan felt his heart break. He pulled Henry into a hug, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. "Henry, listen to me. Your mom and I love you and Owen more than anything in this world. We're doing everything we can to make sure our family stays together. But why does Grandma want to take us?" Henry's voice was muffled against Ryan's shirt. "Doesn't she love us too?" Ryan closed his eyes, fighting back his own tears. How could he explain the complexities of his mother's actions, the years of manipulation and control, to a 7-year-old boy? "Sometimes," he began slowly, "grown-ups make mistakes. They think they're doing the right thing even when they're not. Your grandma, she has her own ideas about what's best for our family, but she doesn't know you and Owen like we do. She doesn't understand that the most important thing is that we're together and we love each other." As he held his son, Ryan felt a surge of determination. He knew then, with absolute certainty, that he would do whatever it took to protect his family. The next day, Ryan made a decision that would change everything. He called a meeting with his mother, away from the lawyers and the courtroom drama. They met in a small cafe, neutral ground for what Ryan knew would be the most important conversation of his life. Dolores arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed as always, but as she sat across from her son, Ryan noticed something he'd never seen before, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Mother," Ryan began, his voice steady and determined, "this has to stop. You're tearing our family apart, and for what? Some misguided notion of legacy and control?" Dolores's face hardened. "I'm doing this for you, Ryan, for your children. They deserve to be part of the Bennett family, to have all the advantages that come with it." "No, Mother," Ryan said, shaking his head. "You're doing this for yourself. You've always made decisions for me, controlled every aspect of my life, but not anymore. Henry and Owen are my sons, and Victoria is their mother. We're a family, and we don't need your money or your legacy to be happy." "Don't be naive, Ryan," Dolores snapped. "You think love is enough? That you can turn your back on everything we've built?" "Yes," Ryan said simply. "Yes, I do. Because I've lived both lives now, Mother. I've had all the money and status you could want, and I've never been as happy as I am now, With Victoria and the boys. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop this lawsuit. You're going to stop trying to control my life and my family. And maybe, if you can accept us as we are, you might have a chance to actually know your grandsons. Dolores stared at him, shock evident on her face. For the first time in his life, Ryan saw his mother at a loss for words. If you don't, he continued, his voice low and firm, if you continue with this fight, then you need to understand something. You won't just be losing this battle. You'll be losing me, completely. I will walk away from everything, the company, the money, all of it, and you'll never see me or your grandchildren again. The silence that followed was deafening. Dolores's face went through a range of emotions, anger, disbelief, and finally, a flicker of something that might have been fear. You don't mean that, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. I do, Ryan replied. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I want and what I'm willing to fight for. The question is, Mother, what are you willing to lose? With that, Ryan stood up and walked out of the cafe, leaving his mother staring after him. As he stepped onto the busy New York street, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Whatever happened next, he knew he had finally broken free from the chains of expectation and control that had bound him for so long. The day of the final hearing arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Ryan and Victoria sat with their lawyer, while Dolores and her legal team occupied the other side of the room. The judge entered, and everyone rose, the rustle of clothing and shuffling of feet, the only sounds in the otherwise silent room. As the proceedings began, Victoria felt her heart racing. This was it, the moment that would decide their future. She looked over at Ryan, drawing strength from his steady presence beside her. But before the arguments could begin in earnest, there was a commotion from the other side of the courtroom. Dolores had stood up, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing out clearly, I would like to withdraw my petition for custody. A collective gasp went through the room. Victoria felt Ryan's hand tighten around hers, hardly daring to believe what they were hearing. The judge peered over her glasses at Dolores. Mrs. Bennett, are you certain? Once withdrawn, this petition cannot be reinstated. Dolores straightened her shoulders, looking every inch the formidable woman she had always been. But when she spoke again, there was a note in her voice that Ryan had never heard before, something close to humility. I'm certain, Your Honor. I've come to realize that my actions were misguided. My grandsons are exactly where they need to be, with their parents who love them. As Dolores sat down, the courtroom erupted into murmurs. The judge called for order, then turned to Ryan and Victoria. In light of this development and based on the evidence presented in the home studies and evaluations, I see no reason to alter the current custody arrangement. Mr. Bennett and Ms. Reeves will retain full custody of Henry and Owen Bennett. Case dismissed. The bang of the gavel seemed to echo through Victoria's entire body. It was over. They had won. She turned to Ryan, tears streaming down her face, and found him already reaching for her. They embraced, the relief and joy almost overwhelming. As the courtroom began to clear, Ryan looked over Victoria's shoulder and caught his mother's eye. Dolores gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning and walking out of the courtroom. That evening, as they celebrated their victory with a small gathering of friends and family, including Andrew, who had been a pillar of support throughout the ordeal, Ryan and Victoria watched Henry and Owen playing with their cousins. The boys were laughing, carefree, blissfully unaware of how close they had come to having their world turned upside down. Victoria leaned into Ryan's side, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I can hardly believe it's over, she said softly. Ryan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Not over, he said. Just beginning, on our terms. As the night wore on and their guests began to leave, Ryan and Victoria found themselves alone on the balcony of their apartment. The city stretched out before them, a tapestry of lights and possibilities. You know, Ryan said, turning to face Victoria, throughout this whole ordeal there's been something I've wanted to ask you, but it never seemed like the right time. Victoria felt her heart skip a beat as Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He got down on one knee, looking up at her with eyes full of love and hope. Victoria Reeves, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever known. You've given me the greatest gifts in Henry and Owen, and you've shown me what it truly means to be a family. I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes as Ryan opened the box to reveal a beautiful, understated ring. It wasn't the ostentatious diamond she might have expected from a Bennett years ago, but a delicate band with a small, perfect sapphire, her favorite stone. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Ryan, yes." As Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Victoria felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. They had weathered the storm, faced down the demons of the past, and come out stronger on the other side. Inside, they could hear Henry and Owen laughing as they got ready for bed. The sounds of their family, their real, true family, were the sweetest music to their ears. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms and looking out over the city that had become their home, Ryan and Victoria knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. The Bennett family had been redefined, reshaped into something stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The story of Ryan, Victoria, Henry, and Owen Bennett was far from over. But this chapter, a chapter of struggle, growth, and ultimately triumph, had come to a close. And as the lights of New York City twinkled around them, the promise of all the chapters yet to come filled their hearts with joy and anticipation. In the end, they had discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or social status, but in the love and bonds of family. And by that measure, the Bennetts were rich beyond their wildest dreams. The New York winter had given way to spring, and with it came a sense of renewal that seemed to mirror the changes in the Bennett family's life. The cherry blossoms in Central Park were in full bloom, their delicate petals a reminder of the beauty that can emerge after even the harshest of seasons. In a cozy brownstone in Brooklyn, Victoria stood at the kitchen counter, sipping her morning coffee and watching as Ryan helped the twins with their breakfast. The scene was so ordinary, so domestic, that it sometimes took her breath away. After everything they had been through, these quiet moments of family life felt like a precious gift. "Dad, can you help me with my science project today?" Henry asked, his mouth full of cereal. Ryan grinned, ruffling his son's hair. "Of course, buddy. What are we working on?" As Henry launched into an excited explanation of his volcano model, Victoria caught Ryan's eye over the boys' heads. The love and contentment she saw there made her heart swell. The ring on her finger caught the morning light, a constant reminder of their commitment to each other and this life they were building. The aftermath of the custody battle had brought about changes none of them could have anticipated. For Ryan, it had been a journey of profound self-discovery and redemption. Walking away from the Bennett empire hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. He had taken a job with a smaller, ethically focused investment firm, where he found he could use his skills to make a positive impact on the world. More importantly, he had thrown himself into fatherhood with a dedication that continually amazed Victoria. From coaching Owen's soccer team to staying up late helping Henry with his reading, Ryan was determined to make up for lost time. The bond he was forming with his sons was beautiful to witness. "You know," Ryan said one evening as they watched the boys playing in the backyard, "I used to think success was all about the bottom line, about acquisitions and profit margins. But this," he gestured to the scene before them, his voice thick with emotion, "this is success, this is everything." Victoria squeezed his hand, understanding completely. Her own life had undergone a transformation as well. With the stress of the custody battle behind them, she had been able to focus on her career in education. She had recently been promoted to head of the English department at her school, a role that allowed her to inspire not just her students, but other teachers as well. But perhaps the most significant change had been in their relationship with each other. The crucible of the custody battle had forged a bond between them that was stronger than ever before. They had learned to communicate openly, to trust each other implicitly, and to face challenges as a united front. Their wedding, held in the same park where they had reunited, had been a joyous affair. Henry and Owen had been the ring bearers, their faces beaming with pride as they walked down the aisle. Andrew, true to his word about always being there for them, had been Ryan's best man. The ceremony had been a celebration not just of their love, but of the family they had built together. As for Dolores Bennett, the aftermath of the custody battle had brought about a stark change in her life. The withdrawal of her petition had been followed by a retreat from public life. The once formidable matriarch of Boston society found herself increasingly isolated, her influence waning as quickly as her social invitations. Ryan had made several attempts to reach out to his mother, driven by a mix of concern and a desire for reconciliation, but Dolores, whether out of pride or shame, had rebuffed these overtures. The last time Ryan had seen her, at a chance encounter at a charity event in Boston, he had been struck by how small she seemed, how the fire that had once burned so brightly in her eyes had dimmed to a flicker. "Mother," he had said, approaching her cautiously. "How are you?" Dolores had looked at him, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. "I'm fine, Ryan," she had replied, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. How are the boys?" It was the first time she had ever asked about her grandsons, without an ulterior motive, and Ryan felt a glimmer of hope. "They're wonderful, Mother. Growing so fast. They ask about you sometimes." A flash of something, regret, perhaps, crossed Dolores's face. "Do they? I'm glad they're well." The conversation had been brief and stilted, but as Ryan watched his mother walk away, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. Dolores had built her entire life around a certain vision of success and family, and now that vision had crumbled. She was a woman out of time, clinging to outdated ideals in a world that had moved on without her. Back in New York, Ryan shared this encounter with Victoria. "I can't help but feel sorry for her," he admitted. "She's so alone now." Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful. Maybe we could invite her to visit, to meet the boys properly." Ryan looked at her in surprise. "I would be okay with that, after everything she put us through." Victoria took a deep breath. It won't be easy, but she's still their grandmother. And if we truly believe in the importance of family, doesn't that include trying to heal old wounds? It was moments like these that reminded Ryan why he had fallen in love with Victoria in the first place. Her capacity for forgiveness, her willingness to see the best in people, never ceased to amaze him. The invitation was sent, though whether Dolores would accept remained to be seen. But the very act of extending the olive branch felt like an important step in their family's journey. As spring turned to summer, life in the Bennett Reeves household fell into a happy rhythm. Weekends were filled with trips to museums, picnics in the park, and lazy Sunday mornings with pancakes and board games. Ryan and Victoria made a point of having regular date nights, keeping the spark in their relationship alive amidst the beautiful chaos of family life. One warm evening, as they sat on their small balcony after the boys had gone to bed, Victoria turned to Ryan with a mischievous glint in her eye. "So, Mr. Bennett," she said, a smile playing at her lips, "how do you feel about expanding our family?" Ryan's eyes widened. "Are you—" Victoria shook her head, laughing. "No, not yet. But I've been thinking, maybe it's time we started trying for another baby. What do you think?" The joy that spread across Ryan's face was answer enough. He pulled Victoria into a passionate kiss, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. The idea of experiencing pregnancy and early parenthood together, of adding to their already beautiful family, filled them both with excitement. As they discussed their plans for the future, Ryan couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. From the pain of their past to the joy of their present, every step of their journey had led them to this moment. They had faced challenges that might have broken a weaker couple, but instead, those trials had only made them stronger. The themes of forgiveness, growth, and the true meaning of family were woven throughout their story. They had learned to forgive, not just each other, but themselves. They had grown individually and as a couple, shedding old insecurities and embracing new strengths. And they had discovered that family wasn't about bloodlines or legacies, but about love, support, and choosing each other every single day. Their journey of redemption and self-discovery was ongoing. Ryan continued to work on breaking free from the patterns of his upbringing, learning to prioritize emotional connections over material success. Victoria was exploring new ways to use her experiences to help other families facing similar challenges, considering writing a book about their story. Together, they were redefining what it meant to be a Bennett. It wasn't about social status or financial power anymore. Instead, it was about integrity, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of love. As the summer progressed, they received an unexpected letter. It was from Dolores, her usually impeccable handwriting slightly shaky. In it, she accepted their invitation to visit, expressing a tentative desire to meet her grandsons properly. The day of Dolores's visit dawned bright and clear. Victoria and Ryan had prepared the boys, explaining that their grandmother was coming to see them. Henry and Owen, with the resilience of children, were more excited about the prospect of a new person to show their toys to than apprehensive about meeting the woman who had once tried to take them away. When Dolores arrived, she seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than Victoria remembered. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that had never been there before. "Hello, Mother," Ryan said, his voice gentle. "Welcome to our home." Dolores nodded, her eyes taking in the cozy living room with its family photos and children's artwork. "It's lovely," she said, and for once there was no condescension in her tone. The initial moments were awkward, with Dolores clearly unsure of how to interact with her grandsons. But children have a way of breaking down barriers, and soon enough, Owen was showing her his favorite action figures, while Henry explained the intricacies of his latest Lego creation. As Victoria watched from the kitchen, preparing lunch, she saw something she had never expected to see, a genuine smile on Dolores Bennett's face as she listened to her grandson's chatter. Ryan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he murmured. Victoria nodded, leaning back into him. "Yeah, it's not what I expected, but it's good, I think." The visit wasn't without its tense moments. Old habits die hard, and there were times when Dolores's ingrained beliefs about status and appearance bubbled to the surface. But there were also moments of genuine connection, glimpses of the grandmother she could have been all along. As Dolores was preparing to leave, she paused at the door, turning to Ryan and Victoria. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it." Ryan stepped forward, taking his mother's hand. "Family is about second chances, Mother. About forgiveness and growth. We're all learning together." Dolores nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. As she hugged her grandsons goodbye, promising to visit again soon, Victoria felt a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying lift from her shoulders. The road to healing was long, but they had taken the first steps. That night, as they tucked the boys into bed, Henry looked up at them with serious eyes. "Is Grandma going to be part of our family now?" he asked. Ryan and Victoria exchanged a glance. "She's trying, honey," Victoria said carefully. "Just like we're all trying to be the best family we can be." Owen piped up from his bed. "I liked her stories about when Dad was little. Can she come again?" Ryan ruffled Owen's hair, his heart full. "We'll see, buddy. One step at a time, okay?" As they closed the boys' bedroom door, Ryan pulled Victoria into a hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" she asked, looking up at him. "For everything. For loving me, for giving me a chance to be a father, for showing me what real family means, for being you." Victoria smiled, reaching up to kiss him softly. "We did this together, Ryan. All of it." As they stood there in the hallway of their home, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together, they both felt a sense of peace settle over them. The journey hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But they had each other. They had their boys, and they had a love that had weathered the fiercest storms. The Bennett family had been redefined, reshaped into something beautiful and strong. It wasn't about blood or legacy anymore, but about choice. Choosing to love, to forgive, to grow together. In letting go of the weight of expectations and embracing the messy, joyful reality of their life together, they had found a happiness beyond anything they could have imagined. As they walked hand in hand to their bedroom, the sounds of their sleeping children a gentle reminder of all they had to be grateful for, Ryan and Victoria knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Their story was far from over, but this chapter, a chapter of healing, of redemption, of love triumphant, had come to a close. And as the New York City night settled around their home, the Bennett Reeves family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found the truest wealth of all, the love and bonds of family. 10 years had passed since that fateful summer when the Bennett Reeves family had begun to heal old wounds and forge a new path. The New York City skyline, visible from their Brooklyn brownstones rooftop garden, glittered in the warm evening light as the family gathered to celebrate a special occasion. Henry and Owen, now strapping young men of 17, moved about the rooftop with an easy confidence, helping to set up for the party. Henry, with his father's thoughtful eyes and his mother's gentle smile, was deep in conversation with his younger sister, Lily. At 7 years old, Lily was the unexpected gift that had cemented their family's joy. her arrival bringing a new dimension of love and laughter to their home. Owen, sporting his father's charm and his mother's determination, was manning the grill, flipping burgers with the flair of a seasoned chef. His culinary passion had blossomed over the years, much to everyone's delight. Victoria emerged from the rooftop door, carrying a tray of lemonade. At 47, she radiated a quiet strength and contentment. The years had been kind to her, each laugh line a testament to a life filled with joy. She paused, taking in the scene before her, marveling at how far they had come. Ryan appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and planting a kiss on her cheek. "Penny for your thoughts, love?" he murmured. Victoria leaned into him, smiling. "Just thinking about how lucky we are. Look at them, Ryan. Look at what we've built together." Ryan nodded, his eyes misting slightly as he watched his children. Henry, the aspiring environmental lawyer, passionately discussing his latest internship at a prominent non-profit. Owen, the budding chef, whose talent in the kitchen was matched only by his drive to use food as a means of bringing people together. And little Lily, her artwork decorating every available surface, her creativity knowing no bounds. The rooftop door opened again, and Andrew stepped out, his hair now streaked with distinguished grey. He was followed by Dolores Bennett, moving slower now at 80, but with a warmth in her eyes that would have been unrecognizable a decade ago. "Grandma," Lily squealed, running to hug Dolores. The older woman's face lit up as she embraced her granddaughter, the joy evident in every line of her face. The transformation in Dolores had been gradual but profound. That first visit had led to more, each one chipping away at the walls she had built around herself. There had been missteps and old habits to overcome, but the love of her grandchildren and the patient understanding of Ryan and Victoria had worked miracles. Now, Dolores was a regular fixture in their lives. She had sold the Boston mansion years ago, opting for a smaller apartment closer to her family. The Bennett fortune, once a source of strife, had been largely donated to educational charities, with trusts set up for the children's futures, not to control them, but to support whatever dreams they might pursue. As the family settled around the table, the cityscape providing a stunning backdrop, Ryan stood to make a toast. "I know we're here to celebrate Henry and Owen's graduation," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "but I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought us here." He looked around at the faces of his loved ones, Victoria, his rock and his heart, Henry and Owen, the sons who had taught him the true meaning of fatherhood, Lily, the unexpected blessing who completed their family, Andrew, the friend who had become family, and his mother, Dolores, whose presence was a testament to the power of forgiveness and change. 10 years ago, we were fighting battles we never should have had to fight. We were learning what family really means. And now, looking at all of you, I realize that every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt was worth it, because it led us here, to this moment, to this love. Victoria squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Henry and Owen exchanged glances, a lifetime of shared experiences passing between them in a single look. Dolores dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Andrew raised his glass in silent salute. "To Henry and Owen," Ryan continued, "I couldn't be prouder of the young men you've become. You've taken the best of what your mother and I could give you and made it uniquely your own. Whatever paths you choose in life, know that we'll always be here, cheering you on." As the family clinked glasses and fell into comfortable conversation, Victoria found herself reflecting on the twists and turns that had led them to this point. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by the joy of the present and the promise of the future. Henry was headed to law school in the fall, his passion for environmental justice fueled by summers spent volunteering in national parks. Owen had been accepted to a prestigious culinary institute, with dreams of opening a restaurant that would bring people together over shared meals and shared stories. Even Dolores had found a new purpose. She volunteered at a women's shelter, using her formidable organizational skills to help others rebuild their lives. It was a redemption she had never sought, but had found nonetheless. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Lily tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Mommy," she said, her voice serious, "can you tell me the story again, about how our family came together?" Victoria smiled, pulling her daughter onto her lap. The others quieted, drawn in by the familiar request. Even Henry and Owen, who had heard the story countless times, leaned in to listen. "Once upon a time, Victoria began, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the rooftop. There was a woman who thought she knew what love was, and a man who had forgotten. They found each other, lost each other, and then found each other again. Along the way, they learned that family isn't about where you come from, but about who you choose to love, and who chooses to love you back. As Victoria's words painted the picture of their family's journey, from the halls of the Bennett mansion to the cozy rooms of their Brooklyn home, each person around the table felt the weight of their shared history, the struggles they had overcome, the love they had fought for, the family they had built together. It was all there in her words. And the most important thing they learned, Victoria concluded, looking around at the faces of her loved ones, was that happy endings aren't really endings at all. They're just the beginning of a new chapter. As her words faded into the twilight, a comfortable silence fell over the group. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had chosen and nurtured, each of them felt the truth of Victoria's words deep in their hearts. The story of the Bennett Reeves family was far from over. There would be new challenges to face, new joys to celebrate, new lessons to learn. But whatever the future held, they would face it together, bound by a love that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger for it. As the stars began to twinkle above the New York City skyline, the family lingered on the rooftop, savoring the moment. In the gentle breeze and the warm glow of the fairy lights, they were not just celebrating a graduation or a family gathering. They were celebrating the power of love to heal, to transform, and to create something beautiful out of life's unexpected turns. And as Ryan and Victoria shared a quiet smile over the heads of their children, they knew that this moment, this family, this love, was the truest happily ever after they could have ever imagined. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.